Girl stops. Mom's wedding. Reveals shocking truth about her fiancé. Mom calls 911. Immediately, they almost buried her in a wedding dress. Reverend Eliza Johnson stood at the altar, wrapped in hope and blue satin, smiling at a man who was about to end her life. The congregation smiled too. No one saw the noose hidden behind the vows, except the child. Clara Mae Johnson, 9 years old, small as a whisper, spine stiff as gospel. She sat in the second pew with a Bible on her lap and hell burning behind her eyes. She'd heard the late-night calls, found the insurance policy, saw through the smile that was a snake's skin turned inside out, and when the preacher said, "Speak now, or forever hold your peace," she rose. "He's gonna kill her." The words dropped like thunder in a room that had only ever known hymns. Her mother turned, the groom blinked, the truth shattered like stained glass. People often wonder how a child can carry something so heavy, but that's the wrong question. The question is, what happens when a child is the only one willing to speak? Sit down. Don't blink. You're not ready for what comes next. But it's time you heard it. All of it. Because stories like this don't happen in the cities or the glow of street lamps and concrete. They occur in the places where the soil holds memory, where porch swings creak under the weight of unsaid things, and where folks still call each other ma'am and sir, not out of respect, but out of habit, and sometimes fear. Clarksdale, Mississippi, 1967. The kind of town where summer came heavy, pressing down on your lungs like a sermon that went too long. Where the magnolia trees bloomed loud and proud, their perfume choking the air. Where the churches were full on Sunday morning and empty on Sunday night, except for the whisper of broom bristles and the echo of someone's shoes across hardwood floors. This was the year after Dr. King had marched through Selma, but you wouldn't have known it here. In Clarksdale, change moved slowly, like a mule stuck in the mud. White folks still looked at colored folks sideways, and black children were still taught to walk the long way around, keep their heads low, and never talk back to a white man, especially not one dressed clean, smiling sweet, and standing next to your mama at the altar. That was the world Clara Mae Johnson was born into. Her mama, Reverend Eliza Johnson, was the only woman preacher most folks had ever seen. She wore her collar like armor and read scripture like she meant it. A widow since 63, Eliza had poured her grief into the pulpit and her love into her daughter. Clara Mae was the kind of child who spoke little but saw a great deal. The kind who didn't interrupt grown folks, but who noticed when someone's story didn't match their eyes. She watched, she listened, and in the summer of her 9th year, she started writing things down in the margins of her Bible. Not verses, but questions. Why does Mama smile when he's near, but I feel cold? Why does he laugh with his mouth, but not with his eyes? His name was Martin Whitmore. Said he came from Jackson. Said he'd found Jesus late, but found him good. Said all the right things, until he didn't. See, men like Martin don't kick down the door. They slide in through the cracks. He came to church first, sat in the back row, hands folded, eyes lowered. Then, over the weeks, he moved closer to the pulpit, closer to Eliza. He brought casseroles. He fixed the steps on the old parsonage. He called Clara Mae Champ, ruffled her hair, and whistled hymns while he shaved. He knew how to blend in until the shadows caught him, and Clara Mae saw the shadows. It started with the phone calls, late at night, after Mama had gone to bed. Clara would wake to the hum of the hallway light and the low rasp of Martin's voice. She never meant to eavesdrop. But when a child hears a voice change, sweet turning sour, calm turning sharp. They listen. They remember. Clara remembered the name he whispered, Danielle. She remembered the way his fingers drummed the table when Eliza wasn't in the room, like he couldn't wait for something. She noticed how he flinched whenever the insurance man came by the house, and how one night she caught him reading Mama's bank papers under the kitchen light. And she remembered the one night that changed everything. He didn't see her, curled behind the hallway wall. He thought he was alone when he said it. "She's signing it tomorrow," he told Danielle. "Once it's done, it'll look like an accident. She's got a heart condition. Easy. The money comes fast. $500,000. Double indemnity. We split it, baby. Just like Biloxi." That was when Clara May felt it. The floor of her world was cracking open. Now a lesser child might have run, might have cried. But Clara? She stayed very still, and when he hung up, she went back to bed. Not to sleep, but to plan. She knew Mama wouldn't believe her without proof. Not just words, evidence. And she found it in his suitcase, between the shirts he never wore and the cologne he didn't use. A copy of the policy, a folder with clipped articles from other towns, a photograph, Martin smiling, arm around a different woman. Not Mama, not anyone from Clarksdale. She folded it all and placed it beneath the liner of her church shoes. The morning of the wedding, Clara May dressed slowly. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was just a girl. Skinny arms, shy smile, 2 big eyes. But she also knew something the grown-ups didn't, and that made her dangerous. Clarksdale was already awake. The bells rang, the birds sang. Folks filed into the church wearing linen and hats, fanning themselves with paper programs. The altar was dressed in lace. Mama wore blue. Martin stood tall, and Clara May took her seat in the second pew, shoes tight, heart tighter. The rest, you know how it begins. But you don't see how it ends. Not yet. Because it wasn't just a child speaking out. It was the land speaking through her. The past is rising. The truth, shaking off its Sunday clothes and stepping into the light. And once a child dares to speak the unspeakable in a place built on silence, nothing stays the same. Not even Clarksdale. Not even a mother's heart. And indeed not the devil in a white suit. Some men lie with words. Others lie with their eyes, or the way they hold their fork, or the way their smile disappears the moment no one's looking. Martin Whitmore lay with his present. He smelled of church pew polish and cologne that cost more than most folks' weekly wages. But it wasn't what he said or did that chilled Clara May. It was what he didn't. He didn't kneel when they prayed. He didn't look at Mama when she sang. And he didn't once, not once, speak to Clara May when her mother left the room. She began to notice the silences before she noticed the danger. There are things a child can sense long before they can name them. Unevenness, a dissonance in tone, the feeling that someone is smiling without meaning to. Clara May wasn't a nosy child. Reverend Eliza had raised her with humility, patience, and a strong sense of personal space. But when Martin walked into their lives, it was as though a window had been cracked open in winter. The house no longer felt warm. It felt brittle. He played the part well in front of others, sang hymns with just enough soul to pass, passed biscuits with just enough charm to be liked. Women from the congregation called him a blessing. "Eliza deserves happiness," they said, "and it's good for Clara to have a man around." That was the part Clara didn't understand. Why did folks assume a man, any man, was better than none? When her daddy died, Clara grieved deeply and quietly, like her mama. They didn't shout their sorrow. They folded it into daily life, in the way Eliza tightened her headscarf each morning, in how Clara carried his Bible to Sunday school. So when Martin came, loud and sudden with promises of fixing what hadn't been broken, Clara didn't trust the shift. It started small, as such things always do. Martin would correct her in front of others, not out of cruelty, but with a patronizing tone that made her feel like a trespasser in her own house. "Clara May," he'd say, "don't slouch now. A young lady ought to carry herself with grace." Or, "Let the grown folks talk, sweetheart." When Eliza was around, he made a point of asking about Clara's schoolwork. He ruffled her hair like she was a dog. But when they were alone, when Mama was in the backyard, hanging laundry or visiting a parishioner, the tone shifted. His eyes grew flat. His lips pinched into something that resembled a smile, only if you were standing too far away to see the malice. "You're a strange little girl," he said once, catching her watching him from the hallway. "Too quiet for your good." That was the first time Clara didn't look away. She didn't answer, didn't nod, just stood there with her small fingers wrapped tight around the wood of the doorframe. She was beginning to understand something important. Grown-ups lie to themselves more than they lie to children. And Mama wanted to believe in love again so badly, she couldn't hear the silence Clara heard so loudly. But silence doesn't stay still. It moves. It spreads. Clara began writing things down. In her school notebook, behind spelling tests and math problems, she kept track of Martin's moods, of how many times he left the house at night, of the phone calls he took outside on the porch. She noted when he'd come back smelling like cigarettes, even though he told Mama he didn't smoke. She started to listen harder. She tuned out the world and tuned into him, his footsteps, his voice, the way he shifted when the subject of money was mentioned. And then one night, the truth didn't just slip in, it screamed. It was after 11. Mama had gone to bed early with a headache. Clara had stayed up reading under the blanket with a flashlight. She heard the creak of the hallway floorboards and the familiar click of Martin's voice slipping into something lower, less performative. She crawled to the vent near the baseboard, which ran to the kitchen. And through it, she heard the words that would change her forever. "I'm telling you, Danielle, she's signing it this week. $500,000, clean. You said we'd be done by the fall, remember? One accident and we'd disappear. I've done it before. Biloxi, you said you trusted me." Clara's breath left her. It wasn't a story. It wasn't childish jealousy. It was real. This man, this smiling, hymn-singing, biscuit-baking man, was planning to kill her mother. And she, Clara May Johnson, age 9, was the only person on earth who knew it. She didn't cry. Not that night. She lay under the covers, stiff as a board, her Bible on her chest, like a shield. She didn't sleep. She listened. Every sound, every footstep, every door creak, every whisper of wind felt like a warning. She wanted to tell Mama, but how could she? Eliza was in love, and love, when it has waited too long, can go blind. Clara knew if she told too soon, Martin would deny it. Mama might even scold her. Worse, he might get away with it. So she waited. She watched. And in the meantime, she looked for proof. Children don't always have power. But Clara had something better. She had time and the will to use it. There comes a moment, often quiet, when a child decides she can no longer be a child. Clara May Johnson made that decision on a Thursday morning, barefoot in the kitchen, holding a glass of orange juice while Martin kissed her mama on the cheek and called her sugar. It wasn't the kiss that broke something in Clara. It was the way Martin's hand lingered at Eliza's neck just a moment too long, like he was measuring something, like he was saying goodbye. Clara stared into her glass. She didn't sip. She didn't speak. She just stared, And she made a vow. She would find what she needed. She would stop him, somehow. She waited until Saturday when Martin left the house alone in his truck, claiming he needed to pick up cufflinks from the jeweler. Clara didn't believe that for a second. He always lied in half-truths, just enough sugar to disguise the arsenic. Once the dust from his tires settled on the gravel road, she moved fast. Up the stairs, past the creaky floorboard outside the linen closet, into the guest room, Martin's room. His suitcase was tucked under the bed, zipped, but not locked, a careless mistake for a man who planned murder. Inside, between neatly pressed shirts and a silver comb, Clara found what she hadn't even known she was looking for, a file folder. It wasn't thick, but it was heavy in meaning. She opened it with hands that trembled, though her heart felt still and sharp. Inside, a copy of a life insurance policy. The name, Eliza Johnson. The amount, $500,000. Not in case of death, no, in case of accidental death, the kind that paid double. Clara didn't fully understand insurance, but she understood that her mother was unaware of this policy. And she knew, down in her bones, where real knowing lives, that the man who brought her flowers last week was not planning a future with her. He was planning her end. There were more papers, one with scribbled notes, Eliza's schedule, times she'd be home alone, a name, Danielle, a phone number with an area code Clara recognized from a motel billboard outside of town, and finally, photographs, black and white, time-stamped in faded ink. Martin, only he wasn't Martin in the captions. Doug Kinney. One photo showed him holding another woman's hand. Another showed him with a suitcase in front of a different chapel. Clara's knees nearly buckled. She clutched the edge of the bed and breathed, steady and slow, the way her mother taught her to do before Sunday school speeches. Then she took the folder, carefully folded the insurance policy and 2 photos, and slipped them into her own Bible between Psalms and Proverbs. The rest she left exactly where she'd found it. That night she barely touched her dinner. Martin noticed. "You feeling all right, champ?" he asked, smiling with those thin lips and predator teeth. Clara looked up, met his gaze, and said, "I'm fine." Then she excused herself. She didn't sleep. Not that night. Her room was too quiet. Her heart was too loud. She thought about telling her mother right then, knocking on her bedroom door and laying it all out. But something stopped her. Not fear, not hesitation, but clarity. Her mama wouldn't just need to hear the truth. She'd need to see it, and it would have to happen in front of others. Clara had learned something watching the world. Grown-ups believe more when other grown-ups are watching. The wedding was only 2 days away. That would be her moment. On the morning of the ceremony, Clara rose before the sun. She bathed, dressed in her blue Sunday dress, and tucked the folder pages inside her Bible again. Her mother looked radiant, hopeful in a way that broke Clara's heart. Eliza touched Clara's cheek, said, "You look beautiful, baby," and Clara forced a smile. The church was packed. Fans waved in the sticky Delta heat. The choir hummed softly behind the organ. Clara sat in the second pew, still and silent, Bible in her lap, eyes locked on the man at the altar, Martin, or Doug, or whatever name he wore today. He didn't glance at her once. Then the moment came. If any soul here has cause or reason, this union should not stand. The air in the church froze. Clara stood. Every head turned. Every breath held. Her voice didn't shake. "I do." And in that second, time split. Not because a child spoke, but because the child knew. Because behind that soft voice and Sunday dress was the weight of evidence, the clarity of purpose, and a truth sharp enough to slice through lies. She held up her Bible, I have proof." The hush that followed wasn't silence. It was awakening. And from that moment on, nothing, not the wedding, not the town, not Clara May herself, would ever be the same. There are moments when the air goes still, as if the world itself is holding its breath. In that little church in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the air stopped moving the second Clara May Johnson rose to her feet. She wasn't tall enough to be seen clearly behind the pews, but when she stepped into the aisle, sunlight caught the soft blue of her dress and the dark resolve in her eyes. Her Bible pressed against her chest, her shoulders square, Clara walked toward the altar with the slow, deliberate steps of someone far older than 9. "I do," she said. The words hit like a crack in stained glass. The preacher blinked. Reverend Eliza Johnson, standing radiant in a cornflower blue gown with a single strand of pearls around her neck, turned slowly to face her daughter. Martin Whitmore's lips curled into a smile, polite, bemused, almost patronizing, the kind of smile meant to dismiss a child without a word. Clara May didn't flinch. "I have something to say," she said, "and I need everyone here to hear it." There was a tremble in the crowd, a murmur beginning to rise, half confusion, half discomfort. No one interrupted a wedding in a southern church, not without good reason, not unless they were mad or desperate. But Clara didn't look angry, and she didn't sound desperate. She looked sure. Martin spoke first. "Now hold on, baby girl. What's this about?" He stepped toward her, hands open in mock concern, voice smooth as butter. "Are you nervous? All this wedding fuss got you stirred up?" Clara lifted the Bible and opened it. From between its pages, she pulled out 2 pieces of paper and a photograph. Her fingers were steady as stone. "I found these in his room," she said. "He's not who he says he is." Eliza took a step forward. Her face was pale, eyes wide, heart caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. "Clara May," she said gently, "what are you talking about?" Clara turned to her mother and handed her the papers. "That's a life insurance policy, Mama. On you. $500,000 if you die by accident. And this is a photo of him with another woman. Her name is Danielle. I heard them talking. He's planning to hurt you." Silence swallowed the church whole. It was the kind of silence that hums, electric, heavy, sacred. Martin's face shifted. First confusion, then amusement. Finally a flash of something mean flickered in his eyes. "Now that's just crazy," he said, laughing softly. "A child finds some old papers, hears half a phone call, and suddenly I'm the devil. Come on, folks." But Eliza was no longer looking at Martin. She was looking at the documents in her hands. Her fingers touched the signature line, the policy number, the date. Last month. Her eyes scanned the name of the agent, then the photo, a motel room. His arm was around a woman with red lipstick and a snake tattoo curling up her wrist. Her knees buckled and she caught the pulpit for support. Martin's charm cracked. The smile vanished. He stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "This is absurd. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." Clara lifted her chin. "I understand more than you think." Martin's face twisted just for a moment into something ugly. His eyes darted toward the doors. He took a step back. Then someone from the congregation, Deacon Avery, stood up. "I know that insurance agent," he said, voice deep and steady. "And that's his signature." More murmurs. People are turning to one another, doubt turning to belief. Martin's breath hitched. He turned to Eliza, who now stared at him like she'd never seen him before. "Eliza," he started, voice soft, apologetic, reaching for the gentleness he'd always performed so well. "I can explain." But Eliza raised her hand, not in violence, in finality. "No," she said. "You've explained enough." The doors at the back opened. Sheriff Booker stepped inside. Someone must have called him, or maybe he just had a hunch. He didn't speak, just looked at Martin. Martin looked back, his jaw clenched, and then he ran. Bolted down the aisle, past pews of stunned faces, out the door into the Mississippi sun. The sheriff followed, hand already on his sidearm. Inside the church, no one moved. Clara turned to her mother. Eliza stared at her for a long moment. Then she knelt, slow, trembling, and pulled her daughter into her arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered into Clara's hair. "Lord, I'm sorry." Clara didn't cry. She didn't need to. The truth had spoken loud enough for both of them. And outside, sirens began to wail. The wedding was over. But something far more sacred had taken its place. The salvation of one woman's life, bought by the bravery of a child who chose to speak, even when the whole world told her to sit down and stay silent. The church never returned to its previous state. For weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. The sanctuary sat quieter than usual. The pulpit remained dressed in blue ribbons that no one had the heart to take down, and the air still carried the scent of lilies, though they had long since wilted in their vases. On the fourth pew, a little girl's Bible was left behind, marked with a folded piece of insurance paperwork, a relic of a day that pulled the curtain off both evil and innocence. Martin, or Douglas Kinney, as the sheriff later confirmed, was found 2 towns over, holed up in a gas station bathroom off Highway 61. He didn't run far. Men like him rarely do. His accomplice, Danielle, was picked up at a motel outside Jackson the next day. Her voice cracked first. She told the deputies about Biloxi, about Nashville, about 2 other women who had signed their lives away before vanishing unexpectedly. No one could prove the deaths were planned, not back then, but the files were reopened, and folks started looking at old obituaries with new eyes. Reverend Eliza Johnson never stepped back into the pulpit, not for sermons at least. She maintained her place in the community, visiting the sick, praying with the grieving. But her voice had changed and not weakened, wiser, heavier, like someone who had learned that faith isn't just about believing in the good. It's about seeing the dark and choosing light anyway. As for Clara May, she became something different after that day. Not overnight, not loudly, but slowly, like rain soaking into dry earth. The town treated her with a strange mix of reverence and pity. They called her brave, but they also looked at her like she'd cracked something sacred. It wasn't easy, carrying the truth in a place built on polite secrets and soft lies, but Clara didn't care much for easy anymore. At school, she stopped raising her hand, just to give the correct answer. She asked more complicated questions. She wrote essays that made her teachers shift in their seats. She read law books in the back of the library long before she understood all the words. And she listened, still always listening. Not for whispers in the hallway or lies in the dark, but for the sound of other children being silenced. Because that, she'd learned, was the beginning of danger, when no one listens to the smallest voice in the room. Her mother told her once over hot cocoa on a rainy night, "You saved me. And not just my life, you saved my soul." Clara looked down into her mug, then back at her mother. "You saved yourself, too," she said. "You listened." Years passed, but the story stayed. It became a whispered legend in Clarksdale. The girl who stopped the wedding. A Sunday school teacher started using it as a lesson in courage. A high school principal hung a newspaper clipping in the office, beside a quote from Lincoln. Clara May left Mississippi at 17 with a scholarship in her hand. and the determination of someone who had already faced the worst kind of evil, and told it no. She studied law in D.C., then came back to Jackson, not far from the town that had almost buried her mother. She didn't want to forget where she came from. She wanted to make sure no other child had to go through what she did. She became an attorney for minors, children caught in custody battles, children who weren't believed when they said someone hurt them, children who needed someone to stand between them and the fire. She told their stories. She fought like a storm, and she never forgot what it felt like to stand alone in a room full of adults who'd rather move forward than face the truth. One day, much later, Clara May stood before a group of students at a community college in Greenwood, giving a guest lecture. A young woman asked her, "What made you so sure, at 9 years old, that anyone would believe you?" Clara smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "I wasn't sure anyone would," she said. "I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." After the talk, she sat in her car with the radio off, hands resting on the steering wheel. In her glove compartment was the folded photo, the one from Martin's suitcase, now wrinkled and faded. She didn't keep it out of anger. She kept it as a reminder of what almost happened, of what didn't, of what a child can do when she refuses to stay silent. And outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, like breath returning to a place that had held it for too long. Time smooths over most things. Grass grows back where footprints once crushed it. Pews get polished until the splinters forget the weight they carried. And even scandal gets folded into the past like linens in an attic chest. But not everything fades. Some stories settle deep into the bones of a place, into the way people look at one another, into how they teach their children to speak or listen. Clara May Johnson never wanted to be remembered. She didn't speak out to be a hero. She spoke because her mother's life depended on it, because silence, in that moment, was betrayal, because love, when it's pure, demands voice, demands risk. After the wedding that wasn't, Clarksdale changed, though not overnight. Whispers took on new weight. The women who'd once told their daughters to be polite started adding, "But if something feels wrong, you tell me." Teachers gave second chances to quiet kids with furrowed brows. The sheriff's office hired its first black deputy within a year. That wasn't a coincidence. It was conscience. Because when a child uncovers something the whole town missed, folks learn to humble themselves. Reverend Eliza never stood in the pulpit again, not because she lost her faith, but because she found a new one. Faith in truth over ritual, in listening over preaching. She spent the rest of her life visiting those nobody else remembered, the sick, the poor, the forgotten. And wherever she went, people looked at her differently, with pity, but with awe, as if surviving the devil in a white suit had anointed her with something more profound than scripture. Clara May grew up in that space between fame and shadow. She bore the burden of being the girl who stopped the wedding, but also the blessing of knowing she'd saved her mother's life. In high school, she founded a peer hotline where students could report abuse anonymously. In college, she volunteered at shelters and juvenile courts, learning every crack in the system where kids slipped through. And years later, in a courtroom filled with lawyers who wore suits like armor and voices like thunder, Clara May stood in front of a judge, now a practicing attorney, defending a little girl who reminded her too much of herself. The girl had been ignored, told she was making things up. She didn't like her stepfather. Clara didn't just represent her, she believed her. After winning that case, she sat in her car with the windows down, letting the breeze wash over her face. In her glove compartment was the same black and white photograph from decades ago, Martin, or Douglas, arm around Danielle, grinning like he had a future. She kept it not as a wound, but as a reminder. That evil can be charming. That danger doesn't always wear fangs. That night she drove back to Clarksdale. The town looked smaller now, the streets quieter. But memory made everything vivid. She pulled into the gravel lot beside the old church, now weathered, but still standing. No wedding that day. Just wind pushing through the trees, a hymn echoing faintly from a nearby radio. She stepped inside, no lights, just sun through stained glass, washing the pews in fractured color. She walked down the center aisle, past the rows of memory, until she reached the second pew. She sat there, just as she had all those years ago, feet not swinging anymore, hands not shaking. She reached into her bag and took out a small box. Inside was her childhood Bible, worn and faded. She turned to the same page where she'd hidden the insurance papers long ago, between Psalms and Proverbs. It still smelled like old paper and ink. Then she did something unexpected. She slid the Bible under the pew, left it there, not to forget, to pass it on, because somewhere, someday, another child might sit in that same spot. Maybe not in that town, maybe not in a church, but somewhere a child will feel something is wrong, and they'll need to know that someone before them spoke up and was right. Back outside, Clara stood still for a long while. The wind lifted her curls, just as her mother used to. A jay called out from a branch, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something quiet, something whole, peace, not because the world was safe. It wasn't. It never would be. But because she knew, deep in her marrow, that truth, when spoken with courage, echoes longer than lies. And sometimes, one voice is enough. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, remember to like and subscribe to our channel for more upcoming videos, because sometimes the quietest voices have the most substantial impact.